As you just heard, our scripture reading is taken from Isaiah, the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. And with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the threshold shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me! I am lost. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out." Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." This is the word of the Lord. Praise be to God.
I'd like to take a quick poll. And the way this is going to work, I'm going to ask you a question and then ask you to raise your hand if you answer affirmatively to that. And so the question is, have you ever played hide and seek? Okay, next question. Have you ever played hide and seek with a child that went something like this? "Ready or not, come find me." I can't, is anybody raising their hand? Okay, you can put your hands down, because I've played with kids like that, and there seems to be this understanding that if they can't see me, I can't see them. And I find that a profound expression of the human condition before God. Because it seems to me that I have spent a lot of time playing hide and seek with God of exactly that type. God, if I don't acknowledge what I have done wrong, perhaps you won't notice it. I see this happen all over the place. I even tried to highlight it in a blog post that I wrote about a year ago. It was back in May of 2017, and I was trying to get at a point, partly about this point of playing hide and seek with God. My intent may have been lost in the context. I knew that I had struck a nerve when I looked at with modern technology, when you write blog posts and things, you can get metrics and see how many people have read them. And for me, an average was maybe 60, 70 people. If it was about a topic in society that was particularly meaningful or being talked about at the time, maybe 100 people would read my blog post. I wrote this one and 172 people read it. I got comments on Facebook, I got emails, I got text messages. By and far, most of them were thanking me for this article. The title of the article was "More Cussing Might Be Helpful." Now the article, as it went on, I was reflecting on some research that had been released where they had studied people that cuss, and they found, compared to the average, that they tended to be more honest. And I said, this is a good thing. Honesty is good. Now, I also quoted in the research that they had found people that cussed also tended to be less agreeable and less conscientious. I mentioned the Bible scriptures about how it's important to filter ourselves for the sake of other people's consciences. I think all of that just sort of got missed. And what people tended to hear was more cussing could be good. And but what prompted me to write it was I had experienced this sort of what I interpreted as a hide and seek with God kind of moments through my life, because I found as people talk to me, they filter their language when they find out I'm a pastor. And it usually goes along the lines of, they'll say a cuss word and then remember, or somebody will elbow them and tell them that I'm a pastor, and they'll go, "Oh, sorry, pastor." Or they'll start to tell a story and they'll get to this point and say, "Well, I can't tell you, pastor, what I said next." And in my mind, and occasionally in my lips, come out, "It's okay, I'm pretty sure God knows you talk that way." Like, it strikes me as sort of a hide and seek kind of thing of this type. It may not be intended that way, but it always kind of strikes me that way, and so I wrote about it. Honesty it's a good thing, but it's hard. Especially when being honest means acknowledging that we have done something wrong. This is the sort of personal context that I bring to this story of Isaiah. For Isaiah, it seems to start out like a normal Sabbath day. People who studied the context of the scripture think that he has come to a place sometimes known for honesty, sometimes known for pretending we've got it all together when everything's falling apart. He comes to the church, or in his case, the temple. And he starts to worship. And then something that apparently had never happened before happens. God gives to him a vision of what is really going on. And that the people that he sees, and if there's music, the music that he hears or perhaps sings, and the sacrifices that are being offered, that this is a small part of the spiritual reality of what happens when Isaiah comes to worship. And this day, God opens it up to Isaiah. And he gets a vision. He gets a vision of God, that God is there in that place, invisible in the human realm, but nevertheless there. And God is there in a big way. Literally, physically, in a big way. God doesn't even fit in the church, in the temple. The bulk of God is outside of this place, but still the hem of God's robe is plenty enough to fill the place. And Isaiah sees this. He also sees that his worship is joined with heavenly worship. These six-winged creatures that Cheryl talked about called the seraphs, they're flying around and they're singing praises to God, and the praises shake the doorposts of the temple. The temple had something like 40-foot doors, massive structures, and praise is so powerful it shakes the doorposts. Isaiah has a profound reaction to this because, in a sense, he realizes he's caught. This is not a God from whom he can play hide and seek, and he knows that he has things in his life that he would like to hide. He expresses it, first of all, just simply by saying, "Woe is me." And then he goes on to put it in kind of poetic language. He says, "I am a man of unclean lips. I live among a people of unclean lips, and here I have seen God." He has sinned. He's done stuff that's wrong. He lives among people that have sinned and done things that are wrong. And he's realizing in this vision of God that there is no place to hide from that. He's caught. Do you know what it feels like when you've done something wrong, and you know it's wrong, and you know you're caught? I want to ask you to imagine with me just a moment that feeling, if you know what that is, to put yourself in the place of Isaiah. One of the stories from my life that helps me get into that emotional place took place at a church. There was an evening Bible study, and I was there greeting people as they came in, and all of the people had come in, and then came someone who I didn't recognize. And we started talking. It turned out he was a stranger to the church, and I want to skip the conversation because at the end, what I want you to hear is I ended the conversation by telling this man, you're not welcome here. I am supposed to be a follower of Christ who welcomed everyone. I'm supposed to be a leader and a mentor and a model for other followers of Christ. And I ended that conversation by telling that man, you are not welcome here. It was wrong. It was a failure on multiple levels. And he left, and because he was a stranger to the church, I never saw him again. And I had this thing that I had done, and even though no other person in the church saw or heard me do it, I knew that I was caught because God was there. And God knew what I had done. And in that instance and in other instances where I have done something that I know is wrong and I know that I am caught, I had a physical reaction that started in my stomach with sort of a queasiness or a lightness and spread to almost a paralyzing kind of feeling that all of my limbs and muscles got weak. I was caught. And so when I try to put myself into this story of Isaiah where he realizes that God is real and God is there and God is grand and majestic and that Isaiah is anything but, I imagine that is what he felt like. Now usually another feeling follows that feeling of I've done something wrong and I'm caught. And the next feeling that usually comes is one of anticipation of what's going to happen next. And as I talk to people, I find that usually is unique to each individual person and has a lot to do with how they grew up and what they experienced from parents and others when they did something wrong and they got caught. This story in Isaiah, though, is a story not about our parents, but about God and how God reacts when we're caught. It is ultimately a story to teach us about God's judgment and what that looks like. Isaiah, to his credit, confesses what he's done. He realizes there's playing hide and seek with God would be ineffective, and he makes a confession. He acknowledges his sin, that I'm a man of unclean lips, living among a people of unclean lips. And then something happens. There's a movement of one of those six-winged creatures. It heads to the altar. There's a large altar table, probably of stone could have been other materials, but anyway, a large altar table in the temple. It's a place where animal sacrifices were made, and on the altar table set a collection of red-hot stones and coals so that animal sacrifices could be brought and offered as a burnt offering to God, and the smoke and the smells would rise up and symbolic of prayers to God. One of these six-winged creatures, upon hearing Isaiah's confession, moves to the altar with a pair of tongs and grabs one of the red-hot coals. This is the image that Isaiah and we are about to get of what God's judgment looks like. And it's fire, and it's flame. And it moves towards Isaiah, and specifically towards those unclean lips. But then something unexpected happens. It turns out not to be a vision of punishment, but of forgiveness. The creature touches Isaiah's lips with the coal, and then Isaiah hears these words, "Your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out." This is the story of God, Old Testament and New. It's the story of a God who is quick to forgive, eager to forgive. It's the admitting that we need it that comes slowly and hesitantly. And as a result, we often can spend so much time consumed with guilt and worry about what will happen if this comes out that we never get around to experiencing God's forgiveness, and sometimes we don't get to experience others as well. Isaiah puts it out there. says, I'm a man of unclean lips, and he gets this vision of quick and eager forgiveness. I think that when we are quick and eager to confess our sin, we can develop a habit of experiencing God's quick and eager desire to forgive, and that just might give us the strength and the courage to be quick to admit a need for and experience the forgiveness of others. I think when we can get in a habit of quickly confessing our sin and experiencing God's willing forgiveness, that can give us the strength and the courage to offer it to others as well. Isaiah does this and he experiences this forgiveness, but then God's not done with him. God moves right on to a missional kind of question, to ask Isaiah, who will go for us and whom shall I send? It's as if, and it's not as if because it really is this way, it is as if the forgiveness and the confession is just the beginning, not even perhaps the most important part. This is something that John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, incorporated into our very doctrine. He taught that as important as forgiveness and confession are, that they are not the culmination of the life of faith, but just the beginning. And it's all that happens after that God is supremely interested in. God has work for us to do, and if we get too caught up in what I've done wrong and what will happen if people find out, we don't get to experience forgiveness, and we don't get to move forward into the work that God has for us. God comes to Isaiah and says, whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? And Isaiah says, here I am, send me. So I got to experience this entire continuum of messing up, confessing, forgiveness, recognizing there was something more than my whole getting caught up in my messing up that needed to be done back this past February in I will note, a little bit lighter context than what I've been talking about. The date was February 14th, Valentine's Day. The context and the location was the perfect dream wedding of Shandon Klein and her husband Shane. Shandon's a member of the staff here and a friend of mine. We were on the beach, and there's the little sort of, whatever they call that curvy thing that you sit up on a beach to stand under for a wedding. And I'm standing there, and Shane and Shandon are there, and they have some friends and family seated behind. And I welcome everyone in the name of God to witness and bless the joining together of Shandon and Shane. And I asked the two of them to declare their intent to enter into union with each other through the grace of God who calls us into union with himself as acknowledged in our baptism. And they're like, yes, we're ready to go. And I welcomed the family, and I asked them if they prayed God's blessing upon them, and if by God's grace they would do everything in their power to care for and uphold these two in their marriage. And they said, yes, we will. And I read scripture, and I talked about it. And I asked them to take vows to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, to love and to cherish until they are parted by death. And they said they'd do it. And I asked everybody to stand and join me in celebrating the marriage and the first kiss of Mr. and Mrs. Shane Klein. And they clap, and I cue the music to come up, and I start walking down the aisle, and the bride and the groom stay behind. And then I hear the voice of the groom saying, are we going to do the rings? And as I'm standing there with the bride and the groom back at the little wedding thingy, and the family and the friends standing and clapping and the music playing, I realized very quickly that there is no way I can get out of this without getting caught. And so I stop the music, and I have people sit, and I get the rings out of my pocket, and we do the rings. But I'm a little discombobulated. And before we actually do the rings, Shandon leans over me, and she says, "It's okay, we love you anyway." And it's this moment of forgiveness and also this recognition that I've got more important stuff I need to be focusing on than the fact that I just screwed up her perfect beach wedding. And so we went and we did it, and I had everybody stand again and cued the music again, and we walked out and down the aisle again, and they caught it all on video, which they said I could share with you this morning. Yeah. Oh man, I'm so sorry. I forgot. So I forgot the rings. So we're gonna do the rings. Perfect. Shane, if you will take this ring and place it on Shannon's finger. Friends, forgiveness is just the beginning. If we get too caught up in the whole process of worrying about confessing and what'll happen and will we get forgiven, we never get on to the more important mission that God has for us. Isaiah had to leave that temple and go back to this people that were a people that he called of unclean lips. And when we leave this place of worship every week, we go back to like the real world, where people need us not to be so focused on ourselves that we forget to share the good news of Jesus Christ. That God is alive and real, that God has transformed our lives in a powerful way, and that God is inviting others to experience that as well. The people around us need us to be set free from the guilt and all of the rest of worrying about that, to be able to be those people that are looking out for people other than ourselves, especially those who are weak or poor or suffering from injustice or don't have a voice and need someone to be that voice for them. Isaiah became that voice for God. He became a prophet that would see the people through good times and bad, through one of the most tumultuous times in all of the history of the Jewish people, because he was able to come to that place and confess his sin, to receive the forgiveness, and move on to the mission. I believe that God is still calling out, who will go for us? Who will I send? And hoping that we, like Isaiah, will answer, here I am, Lord, send me. Amen.